Here we have rubbing Strake, port and starboard for a Squib keel boat. We're going to Scaf the rubbing Strake so we've got one continuous piece. And we're going to use something called two-step bonding. Great technique that allows the epoxy to penetrate into the end grain of the timber. So this is what we're going to use. We've got our West System 105 and 205 hardener. We've got a little glue brush, small mixing pot, mixing stick, some gloves and some 405 filleting blend, because that will give us a really nice sympathetic colour to the Iroko that the rubbing Strake is made from. But before we do anything, we're going to mix up some resin and hardener and prime the end grain. I'm going to blend this together so we get a nice homogeneous colour. Good check on your work is to break the cured material out of your mixing pot the next day. And if you've got a residue of uncured material in there, it's a good sign that you're not mixing sufficiently. You could, if you're using everything in the mixing pot, be spreading this onto your work and consequently brushing with unreacted resin and hardener. Now before I coated these scarf joints, I abraded the end grain with 80 grit paper just to lift some wood fibre and give a better anchor for our epoxy. So we've only mixed up a small amount here. I'm just going to brush this on and you should see quite a strong change in colour as the epoxy starts to penetrate the wood fibre. You can see the colour of the wood is deepening quite considerably. These glue brushes are really great for small jobs. They're really nice and cheap. They're available through a West System stockist. The one problem with them is that the hairs do tend to fall out, but if you nip up the metal bridle in a vise, then the hairs stay in. Simple fix. Nice and cheap, you can throw them away. So we're going to just leave these for probably about an hour. We've got something like 14 degrees C in the workshop today, which is fairly cool. So, but if we leave these for an hour, they'll get nice and sticky and it'll give the epoxy a chance to wick into all that end grain and give us a really strong anchor. This is what we call two-step bonding. In other words, we're priming the end grain with resin hardener mix before we then add the filled mix for our glue line. Right, we've now had about an hour for our first step of our bonding of our scarf joints, in other words the priming of the resin to wick into all the end grain. Now we're ready for the second step, which is to mix up the glue line. Once again, we've got some very limited ingredients. We've got our West System resin and hardener, we've got some gloves, we've got a West System stirrer, mixing stick, West System mixing pot, and we've got our 405 filleting blend. This is just to give us the right colour for the glue line. This really is for filleting, but it will work fantastically for a glue line. It contains pulped cotton fibre like the 403 microfibres. There's some silica and there's some almond shell powder to give it the colour, or a mahogany sympathetic colour. So we're just going to mix these up and then produce our glue line. So we've blended our resin and hardener together. You can see here, blended the two together. And now we're just going to add a single scoop of the filleting blend just to give us a nice consistency for our glue line. We just use 1 pump of resin and 1 pump of hardener for this mix. You can see we've got a nice firm consistency for our glue line, just a little bit runny, just so that it does squeeze out a little bit with our when we clamp the two components together. So we're now going to apply that to our scarf joint and then clamp everything together. Now you can see that because we've primed both faces, we only need to apply our adhesive to one face. So we do that just nice and smoothly. Get a nice consistent amount of thickened mix on there. We'll do exactly the same on the other side. Just apply a nice even bead so we get a nice consistent glue line. And then we're ready to clamp these up. We want firm pressure but not enough to squeeze all the adhesive out. Epoxy likes a little bit of a glue line, and that's not to say that your work should be sloppy, your work should be nice and tight and true, but we do need to maintain firm pressure but not over clamp the joint so that we squeeze all the adhesive out. So we'll clamp these up and then we'll look at what they look like when they're clamped up. This is what they look like just before I'm ready to clamp them up. We've just got the two mating surfaces brought together. As I said, we only need the adhesive on one side of the part because we've two-step bonded these, and we're going to clamp them up and just true them up by eye. Because they're Iroko, they're unfortunately slightly out of true, but I'll just true them up by eye when I've got the clamps on. Now you can see I've got one cramp on. I'm just about to put the other cramp on. These are just inexpensive quick cramps. They work really well with epoxy because they seem to be a good habit of releasing away from cured material. Just swivel that round so that you can see the joint. I'm just using these quick cramps. These are really inexpensive and they do release away from the epoxy. There's a nylon pad on the clamp that seems to release away. I'm just using some firm pressure just to squeeze, just to get some pressure on the glue line. Then I can just clean it up. My fingers, maybe just get a bit in there. So I can plane this off tomorrow, make it look smart, and there we have it. Just try and line these up a bit. This one's quite lined up, the other one I think it's pretty much there. Because they're Iroko, they're actually moving all over the place. But that's basically it. That's two-step bonding using West System as your initial primer coat, leaving that for an hour or so to wick into that end grain on the end grain of the scarf joint, then making up a mix. And in this instance I've used filleting blend, 405 filleting blend, because I wanted a colour to the glue line that's sympathetic with the Iroko. I'll plane these up tomorrow and then we can have a look at what they look like. So there we have our scarf joints cured overnight, ready for machining and planing flush. So after sanding, two fairly nice scarf joints. Whether you can see that. nice and tidy, certainly good enough for a rubbing strake.